Hello everyone, my name is Brian Van Hook and welcome to this web video on disaster preparedness for small businesses. The video runs approximately 25 minutes and I'm going to have at the end some additional resources. So if you want to do some additional research or work on your end, I'm going to give you all the tools that you need to do that. So I just want to thank you for taking the time to view this video. A little bit about me before we start. As I mentioned, my name is Brian Van Hook. I'm the Associate Director of the Florida SBDC at Florida International University in Miami. I'm originally from Louisiana. I'm a certified business continuity professional. I have about 12 years of experience with disaster recovery and business continuity. I also have an executive certificate in cybersecurity leadership from FIU as well. And I've worked in both the United States Senate and the Department of Commerce, helping on disasters such as Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Rita, Hurricane Sandy, Midwest tornadoes, and the BP oil spill. And I want to take that knowledge and expertise and help you apply that to your business. A little bit about our center. Our center, the Florida SBDC at FIU, is funded in part through a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Small Business Administration. And our center is part of the Florida SBDC network. You can see in Florida we have centers covering the whole state, and our center is at the bottom and covers Miami-Dade County. In terms of the core services that we provide, our core service that we do is one-on-one business consulting. So we can help a business with financial management, access to capital, international trade, marketing, government contracting, HR issues, a lot of other issues as well. Key to that work is providing information, data, and market research, and we can provide that at no cost to our clients. Also, we do have specialized services and programs such as investment business plans and customized training programs that we can do in partnership with different sponsors. And as I mentioned, our center in Miami-Dade County, we work very collaboratively with our sister centers in Broward, Palm Beach, and Monroe County. So let's get into the presentation. So let's talk about whether your business could survive a disaster. Building a resilient business, which I know you all want to do, involves a lot of different things. It involves risk management, contingency planning, emergency preparedness, disaster recovery planning, succession planning, especially for your key business, your key employees, and yourself. What I always say is kind of think about what would happen if you got hit by a bus tomorrow, unfortunately. What would happen if one of your key employees that knows a lot of your key functions or key processes, what would happen if something happened to them? You need to think through those things in terms of your business because a lot of people rely on that business, not just you and your family. So in terms of what we can do to help you out, our center has business analysts that can help you develop comprehensive strategies to deal with these disasters, whether that's training materials, business continuity plans, emergency preparedness plans, and disaster recovery plans. So whenever you talk about disasters, this is what you think about. This is Hurricane Katrina. This is the lower Ninth Ward. This is in 2005. This is pretty much, a disaster. This is what you think of. I don't need to worry about, something small. I'm worried about a hurricane. I'm worried about a volcano. I'm worried about tornadoes. I'm worried about something that huge is going to impact my business. For a lot of businesses, this is what a business killer looks like. This is road construction. If you're a retail business and you're on a main street, you know what I'm talking about, especially here in South Florida. There's always road construction. They're always closing something down to do work on the telecom or to do work on the water pipes or something else, or repave the roads. If your business is down for a week, for 2 weeks, for a month, for a couple of months, that's going to impact your bottom line. That could jeopardize your business. So what we talk to businesses about is don't just think about a big disaster, a big deal. We need you to think about kind of business interruptions, something that's very small. It could be a cybersecurity breach. It could be, something else. Basically, it can impact your business. In terms of impact, there's some of the statistics up there that you can take a look at. But the bottom line I'm going to make to you is that whether a disaster is, like I said, a simple power outage, whether it's road construction, whether it's flooding, or something big, like you think a disaster with an exclamation mark, it can impact your daily operations and it could jeopardize the future of your business. So, just as Neil deGrasse Tyson talked about, he's very fashionable. Not only is he a genius, but he's also very fashionable with his ties, with his vests. He talks about how you have all this technology, all these inventions, that modern life is so much easier, but it just takes one big disaster to wipe it all away. And then also Max Mayfield talks about preparation through education is less costly than learning through tragedy. Take the time to do the work ahead of time, to learn, to make preparations, then you have to figure it out when something bad happens. And I think, to your credit, you're here today listening to me talk, so you're trying to get some of that education to help your business. So let's talk a little bit about preparedness. The key statistic here that I want to point out to you is that how disasters can cost a business, not just in terms of dollars, but you talked about lost productivity, decreased customer confidence, decreased finances. So I really like that stat from the Institute for Business and Home Safety, where they talk about like little incidents could cost a small business about $3,000 a day. For Sears, for Walmart, for Target, for Google, Amazon, $3,000 a day might not be a big deal, but for a lot of small businesses, that's a big day, that's a big deal for them, for their bottom line. And if you add up a couple of days, that gets pretty significant after a while. You also have to factor in that a lot of businesses don't have an emergency plan. They don't have disaster preparedness plans. They're relying only on insurance. But I'm here to tell you that insurance isn't going to solve everything. It's only a partial solution. It can't replace your customers. It can't cover all losses. You know, there's a lot of things that it doesn't cover. So you need to do some preparations on your end. Don't just wait for insurance or the federal government to be there. You need to be self-reliant. So let's talk about business continuity as being good for business, not just something you have to do, but something that can give you a competitive advantage. Just like the turtle up there, you want to have a leg up on your competitors. So I'm here to tell you that being disaster prepared could help you get an edge on your competitors. Any delay that could result in the loss of a customer to a competitor. So if you're down, if your phone lines aren't working, if you can't make a delivery, you're going to lose that customer. Even if they're a long-standing customer, at the end of the day, they need the products, they need the services that you can provide. And maybe somebody else is less impacted that they can help them out. But also, larger businesses and folks that are contractors with the federal, state, or local government, they need to know that preparedness is important to a supplier. So if you're working with a larger business, if you're looking for the federal, state, or local governments, they factor that into a lot of the bids that they look at. And a lot of times that can make your bid more competitive if you've got a disaster preparedness plan and somebody else who you're competing against doesn't. Because the federal government wants to know that you're going to be in business, the state government wants to know you're going to be in business. And now a lot of the federal agencies are also looking at things like cybersecurity plans. So they want to see that you made some preparations ahead of something bad happening. So let's talk about your business. Let's talk about what makes it run. So you want to talk about who makes your business run, what makes your business run, where does your business run, and how does your business run. You want to think about functions of your business. You want to think about what is critical, what is important, and what is non-essential. Because I'm here to say, when a disaster happens, you can find out really quick what is non-essential. You also want to think about these critical functions and how long can you withstand an interruption to those. So is it 24 hours? Is it 48 hours? Is it 72 hours? These are things that you need to factor in when you're doing your planning on prioritizing. You want to look at things such as recovery time objective, like when do you need this function up and running? How long can you be down? And so what you need to do is the things that are going to be needed quicker, that are critical, you need to prioritize those. You need to put extra planning into that. You need to have your backups. You need to think about things. So those are things that you need to think in terms of your business, in terms of your functions and different recovery time objectives. So let's talk about your supply chain. You want to talk about your suppliers upstream. Obviously, you and your employees are in the middle, and then downstream, your customers. And like the graphic shows, it's domino. One of those things goes down, it can impact the other parts of your business. So I'm a big believer in your front line is your bottom line. And this is actually something that we place a priority on for my center. I practice what I preach. We make sure we know what our staff and employees are doing for disaster preparedness. We make sure that we have up-to-date contact information. We make sure we work with them on their disaster plans because most businesses you just get that emergency contact info when you hire somebody. But in the meantime, people get married, people get divorced, people lose their iPhone, people get a better iPhone, people move. And so something bad happens and you don't have that information. You don't have good information to reach out to them. Or let them know that the business is okay, or let them know that the business is closed. You don't have emergency contacts that are up to date, so you call and the phone is out of you know commission. You can't get a hold of anybody. So what we recommend is that you have alternate means of communication. Get somebody's personal email, get somebody's home phone number, get their spouse's phone number. Try to set up some other types of communicating. Get their cell phone so you can text them, but let them know what number you'll be texting them from. Sometimes people don't accept text or they don't know who it's from. A lot of businesses also are utilizing a lot of these disaster apps, such as WhatsApp, such as Slack, where you can set up a disaster group and you can communicate at once. Everybody can do a check in. I'm okay, I'm safe, or I'm here. Those are really helpful for businesses in terms of uh, staying in touch with their staff. In terms of your staff, you also want to identify, does anybody have any special skills, any certifications, such as first aid, CPR, military training, anything that will come in handy if something bad happens. You also want to work with your employees, as I said, we do, on their personal disaster plans. You want to find out, is somebody going to evacuate? If they're going to evacuate, where are they going to go? If they're going to shelter in place, have they made preparations? Do they know that they could be, on their own for 24, 48 hours? Um, you want to have folks think through also childcare, pets, elderly relatives, elderly neighbors that they might have to take care of. A lot of folks after Hurricane Katrina, they stayed because they had pets. They didn't know where there was a shelter for pets, to take pets in. And actually, a lot of the businesses impacted by Hurricane Katrina, a lot of businesses weren't physically impacted. There was a lot that were, severely damaged, but some of the businesses that weren't impacted, they couldn't reopen because their employees were back, but they couldn't find childcare. They couldn't find a place to get their kids into daycare or into school. So those are things you want to think about. You want to have people think about that before something happens. Let's talk about your suppliers and your contractors. You want to maintain current vendor information. You want to have primary and alternate contacts. You want to have your account numbers. You want to talk to your suppliers and contractors about their continuity plan. I think that should be a red flag if you talk to them and they don't have one or they don't know. Or maybe they have a really good idea that you can incorporate into your business. You also want to have alternate suppliers. It's not just good business, just in case somebody has a better rate for you or better price or better products. But you also want to see if you could have some backups just in case something happens. Maybe you want to have some geographic diversity. Maybe you want to not have everybody in Miami-Dade County in case something happens here. Or maybe you don't want to have everybody in San Francisco, California in case there's a big earthquake. That can impact your supply chain. So you just want to think about those kind of things. You also want to place periodic orders to maintain an active status with those suppliers and contractors. Let's talk about your customers. You want to first identify the likelihood that customers will be present in your business if a disaster occurs. So you want to incorporate that into your safety plans. Is there going to be somebody in my shop? For whatever reason, would there be somebody, in the back office? Would there be somebody else? You want to factor that into your plan. How are you going to ensure the safety of those customers, and how are you going to evacuate them out along with your employees? You want to keep open your communications with customers. Keep your phones, keep your email, keep your website, your social media going so that you can keep them posted on your business. Let them know when you're up and running. Maybe you can have a good sale to get some folks back in the door. But you also want to monitor the internet and social media to track any trending stories. So maybe there's something that's relevant to you or mentions your business, but if you're not monitoring it, you wouldn't know that. And if something is inaccurate, you want to correct the record as soon as you can. You also want to keep a copy of your customer records off site or in the cloud. You want to have that backed up so that you can reach out to them. And you also want to have an alternate work site from which to communicate to customers during recovery. So you want to have a backup location just in case you need to move or you need to set up a call center or do a call down of your customers. But I think that's important for a lot of businesses post disaster. You want to think about other contacts. So a good acronym to remember that is BAIL: bankers, accountants, insurance agents, and lawyers. Certainly, there's other folks that you need to be mindful of, but these are kind of the key ones that we've come up with. In terms of your business, you want to identify your critical functions, but you want to identify critical records for those functions. So what you want to do is you want to make multiple copies of those records, store something on site, store a second copy off site, utilize multiple media formats, the cloud, if you need to do a flash drive or something else, make sure that you have it in a couple different formats and that you can access it. More important than that is you want to back up those records and data. You want to date your backups, you want to identify any new versions, and you want to test those backup systems. Do an exercise to test it. Save it, make sure, and open it up, make sure it works. You also want to maintain photographic records of inventory, furnishings, fixtures, and equipment. That's going to be important for insurance. That's also for the federal government and the Small Business Administration. If something happens to your, business or your office, and you need to show that equipment was functioning, was in good shape pre-disaster, not that it was just trashed pre-disaster and post-disaster. You want to show before and after. So I talked a lot about critical operations. These are runs down kind of a variety of them, from administrative to payroll to debt obligations to communications, equipment, utilities, vital records. This is some of the stuff you need to factor in when you're looking at things that are important to your business. Something else nowadays that you need to factor in is regulatory requirements. One example of a regulatory requirement is HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. They provide protections for personal health information. So if you do any kind of work with patient health info, whether you're a dentist, whether you're a doctor, chiropractor, or anything like that, HIPAA lays out safeguards for organizations to assure confidentiality, integrity, and availability of electronically protected health info. For healthcare organizations or organizations that work with this data, you have to comply with these data security and business continuity standards. Backing up the requirements include backing up electronically, possessing a business continuity plan and data restoration protocols, and providing emergency operations planning and continuation of processes related to protecting this info. The reason why I bring up HIPAA is this is the one that a lot of businesses and even state governments get hit with, where you have some patient info on a flash drive, you leave it in a car, somebody steals it, you get huge fines, $3 million, $4 million, depends on the amount of records that's impacted. But this is just one example of a regulatory requirement that if you don't have a continuity plan, you're not in compliance. So these are things that you need to think about when you're running through disaster. Also nowadays, fresh in mind, we have to think about data and cybersecurity. So just very quickly, you want to use and maintain antivirus software and a firewall. You want to regularly scan your computer and keep software up to date. You want to establish office policies for handling and storing sensitive work-related info, whether that's a clean desk policy, updating your passwords routinely, encryption, kind of walling off different files based on the sensitivity so that only certain people have access. But there's really good information on the US CERT website, so I'd encourage you to check it out. Also, we do have other resources and other videos related to cybersecurity, so I would encourage you to take a look at those as well. But just very basic in terms of a breach, you want to think of, there's a lot of different monetary things that are factored in. So it's loss of reputation, loss of your trust, your brand image, in addition to your loss of customers, any fines, legal fees, investigation fees, loss of contracts. So the average cost of a data breach to a small business is about $38,000. And the average cost per breach record is about $221 per customer. So that adds up, if it ends up being a lot of data. So in terms of planning, it's ongoing. Don't just do it one time of the year. Don't procrastinate. Basic thing that business can do is just do some tabletop exercises. Run through a scenario with your staff. Talk to them about an active shooter. Talk to them about what your procedures are if there's a hurricane. Run through those different scenarios, but most importantly, involve key personnel in the organization. People that would be expected to, act to respond in those situations. If you don't feel like you have the resources, reach out to professionals. Don't just think of us. There's other folks in the community you can reach out to, whether it's emergency management folks at the county level or the city level, different fire departments, different things like that. Those folks are always happy to provide information. And you also want to update your plan regularly and test it repeatedly. Also, planning doesn't stop. You want to train your employees. You want to make preparedness a core business value. Businesses such as Walmart, FedEx, UPS, they pride themselves on disaster preparedness. So when something happens, they're quick to respond. And the best part of doing that is that they're also in a position to assist other businesses and assist their communities. Um, so as I mentioned, you want to see if there's best practices, reach out to your vendors and suppliers and partners. You want to implement and exercise your plan, but more important than that, you want to monitor the performance and evaluate how effective it is. If there's areas you need to change, adjust it accordingly, and then update it as you need to. So, make it a living document. One thing I wanted to point out to you is, now social media um, and disaster apps. So this graphic from the University of San Francisco shows you how folks nowadays are using social media, they're using disaster apps. So a key stat is 25% of folks download disaster related apps. 1 in 5 Americans have used an emergency app. 24% let loved ones know they're safe via social media. So I think this is good in terms of kind of letting you got to think outside the traditional box in terms of your business. So, awkward segue, we actually have a disaster app for businesses that's called Bizaster. And this app was developed in partnership with the FIU Extreme Events Institute and also USAID. And it is available in the App Store and it's available on Google Play. The name is Bizaster. And Bizaster allows business owners to prepare their companies for disasters, respond to incidents, and jumpstart recovery operations post disaster. The best part is that it's free and it's available in both English and Spanish. And the core parts of this app is customizable checklists, so you can run like a disaster. You can also do disaster simulations. You can kind of run down different matrix of disasters most likely to happen to you. What are mitigations that your business can take to mitigate the damage and the impact to your business? But also you can do different assessments and things like that. So a lot of information that our centers come up with, we uploaded this information to the app so that businesses can take advantage of it. And what we found most is that businesses tell us the assessments and the simulations are the things most helpful to them, just to help them do tabletop exercises, do different trainings, and do different things. So I'd encourage you to check. But we're not territorial. So there are other related apps out there in the market. The Red Cross has a bunch of different apps related to first aid, hurricanes, shelter finders. They have a cool one for kids. ICE Standard has one. FEMA also has one related to National Weather Service alerts. Hurricane Tracker is another one that you can get updates on hurricanes, and then Emergency Radio gives you access to EMS, police, other frequencies. So, lastly, good business resources that are out there is ready.gov from the federal government. They have a good business site. The Florida Division of Emergency Management has a great business site for folks that are located in Florida. And then if you're here in Miami-Dade County, Miami-Dade County Emergency Management has a good site on resources and tips for businesses here in South Florida and Miami. I would encourage you, if you want more information, if you really like the content that we provided in this video, to follow us on social media. You can follow us on Facebook at FIU Entrepreneurship or on Twitter at FIU Entrepreneur. We post events, we post information, we post a lot of different resources via our social media channels. So that's the best way to track if we have like in-person events, because we do both in-person trainings and we also do webinars and videos such as this. And then I would encourage you, if you are located in Miami-Dade County, to reach out to us because we can meet with you one-on-one and help you with your business. Our website is sbdc.fiu.edu and our phone number is 305 779 9230. So I thank you for your time. I hope that I've given you some tips to help you make your business a little more resilient, and certainly would be available in terms of providing additional resources. So thank you.